We're going to be covering the skeletal system in today's video. I'm in chapter 8 in your anatomy book. I'm on page 174. We're going to do this video in smaller sections. I think I've split it up into 4 or 5. So first, you should be able to do it in small bursts of studying rather than trying to watch a big long video all at one time. Also, it makes it easier for you to go back and refocus on a specific concept that might be confusing you. So here we go. The skeletal system. Lots of words. Why? Because every bone has a name. So there is a lot of bone names you'll need to learn in this chapter. So the first thing we're talking about is the function. Like, what is the point of our skeletal system and what does it do? Okay. We look at it and we go, okay, bones, I mean, I know what they do, but okay, what do they do? The first one is support. It gives our body a frame, a shape that everything can get stuck onto. Our muscles and then our skin and our hair and our organs get stuck in there in the gaps. Okay, so it gives us a framework of what our body looks like. It gives us protection. Our skull protects our brain. Our rib cage protects our heart and our lungs. Those are the critical organs that keep our body alive. So we have some extra protection for those critical organs. If someone throws a baseball at us, hopefully, it just bounces off our head. We might get a bruise, but hopefully that's, the extent of our damage. Now, if we get hit hard enough, of course, it can damage. Okay. The next one is movement. Our skeletal muscles are the ones that move our body. Okay. And when the muscles move, our bones go along with it. Okay. And where those joints come together, allows our arm to have that movement. The next one is storage. Our bones store calcium. So if you take a multivitamin and you take in a lot of calcium, you have a level that can be in your blood. We want calcium in your blood too, but there's a level that it needs to be at. We have 2 hormones, calcitonin and the parathyroid hormone. Calcitonin reduces your blood calcium. So if you have too much calcium in your blood, the calcitonin tells your body, get it out of there, store it in the bone. The parathyroid hormone does the opposite. The parathyroid hormone says, you don't have enough calcium in your blood. We need some, and it takes it from the bone and puts it back into the blood. So these 2 hormones work in opposite ways to maintain our homeostasis of our calcium levels. Okay. So all of that excess is stored in our bone. And then the last function is called hematopoiesis. Hemato is med term for blood. Poiesis is a suffix in med term that means formation or creation. So it means creating blood, specifically red blood cells and some of our white blood cells. Okay, and those happen in our bones as well. Okay. So we have different categories of bones depending on what they are shaped like. Long bone, short bone, flat bone, and irregular bones are the 4 categories. Some scientists are trying to add this one as another one. Sesamoid is a round bone like your kneecap, but a lot of people just stick the kneecap into the irregular and say, why do we need a category for one round bone? So that really hasn't caught on as an official category. Structure of a long bone. Okay. First of all, your long bones are your arms and your legs. Upper arm, upper leg, lower leg. So these are very important bones. Obviously, they're the ones that get us around, and they're the bones we use every day to do pretty much every function. All of these long bones are, in general terms, have the same shape. Okay. You can see over here 6 parts to the bone. And yes, You need to know them. We're going to get to coding, and it's the epiphysis or the diaphysis that the person fractured. And you're not going to know what that means if you haven't learned it here. So learn these. These are very important terms. So the first one, I'm going to go in order from up there. The diaphysis is the shaft. It's the actual long part. You can see there's a hole in the middle. It's got an open cavity on the inside. And you can see, let me change pens here. You can see that this bone here on the edge is solid. Where up here, it's got all these holes in it on the ends. You probably can't see that. Up here, there's holes in it. That's called spongy bone. But here on the edge is called compact bone. Okay, it is solid in the shaft as far as the bone makeup, of course, with the open hole in the center. The center is called the medullary cavity. And that's where your yellow bone marrow is stored. It's inactive and it's sitting there for when you need it. Elsewhere in your body, it's ready to go. So that's your bone marrow. The epiphysis is the end of the bone. And so you have an end at each end. You only have one diaphysis, two epiphyses. Let's talk med term for a minute. Dia means through. So the diaphysis means like through the, I'm not sure what physis means. Not shaft. It might be shaft. I don't know. It's not bone, that's for sure. Epi means upon. Okay. So think of the dia is going through the bone. That's the length of the bone. And then the epiphysis is upon. So think of that as the ends. Okay. The epiphysis, you can see, has lots of little knobs and bumps in it depending on how it's going to join with the next bone. So for example, my lower arm, these bones here that have to join with my upper arm to create my elbow joint, these bones need to be able to fit together. Now the bone at this end need to be able to fit with my wrist. Okay, so they are shaped differently because they have different functions and they fit together with different bones at each end. Okay, so the epiphysis, you can see a spongy bone. I mentioned about how it's got all those dots in it. Okay, we're going to talk about this epiphyseal line here in a minute, but if you look at that picture, you can see that that line goes through that whole bone. There is a line of what looks like compact bone going through all that spongy bone. Oh no, back to med term. Peri means around. Endo means within. Learn them early in your time here at Ross. You will use endo and peri and the epi that I used on the other side all the time. Peri means around, so it goes around the bone, periosteum. The endo means within, endosteum. So the outside of the bone has a covering called the periosteum. The inside, that medullary cavity, also has a covering called the endosteum. So it's just like the lining or the coverings. Okay. Notice on the outside, the periosteum says everywhere except at the joint surface, which is covered by the cartilage. That's this up here. Cartilage is your shock absorber, so that when two bones bump each other, there's some cushion there, that you're not like jamming bone into bone that's going to break. There is a layer of cushion in the middle, and hopefully your bone does not break. Okay. So when you jump from a distance, a higher distance, onto the ground and you land on your feet, your leg, your upper leg and your lower leg, are going to have some pressure there. Hopefully nothing breaks. That articular cartilage is going to help. Oops. Okay. So those were all long bones. Flat bones look like this. So you can see compact bone on the outside, spongy bone on the inside. Where you see a lot of your flat bones are like in your skull. Okay, we'll be looking at a skeleton here in a minute, and you'll see all the skull bones. Okay. This is kind of like what the internal structure looks like, and you can see that spongy bone is made up of bone cells and has like this whole network of structure, which gives it strength. You can also see in your bones there is a blood supply. Okay, there's arteries and veins going in there. Okay. All right, the next two words I want to focus on here are the osteocytes. Where's my blast? Oh, there we go. Let's try this again. Osteocytes, osteoblast, and osteoclast. Okay. Osteo means bone, cyte means cell. So it's a bone cell. Okay. And just like your skin that keeps creating new skin cells and the dead stuff flakes off and we keep getting new skin, especially if we injure it, like scratch it and we get new skin to replace it. Our bones are also creating new bone cells constantly because we don't want our bone cells to get old because that's when they get weak. So we're constantly creating new bone cells. Well, your bone cells cannot flake off like your skin cells do. We just shed that, right? Well, your bones have to kind of get rid of the old stuff themselves. And that's the osteoblast and osteoclast. Med term, blast means immature. Whoops. So I think of blast and I think the word build because they both start with a B. And so osteoblast literally means immature cell, but I think of it as the bone building cells because the osteoblast are the ones that are creating the bones or the bone cells. Osteoclast dissolves the bone cells. So that's the one that is getting rid of the old worn out bone cells, dissolving it back into itself so that it can basically recycle that into a newly formed. It's going to like pull all the calcium out of it and just kind of recycle so that we can make new cells when we're ready. And so that's the osteoblast and osteoclast activity. One builds and one breaks it down or reabsorbs. We call that remodeling, by the way, the new replacing the old. All right. Okay. This is a infant picture. And in an infant, they have an awful lot of cartilage that will eventually turn to bone as they age. So if we look at an adult skeleton, which we will in just a minute, you will see much less purple because the purple is the cartilage. And so when an infant is born, like their entire rib cage here is cartilage. That's what allows the rib cage to squish together and get out through the birth canal. Okay. The head, we always talk about babies having soft spots. You can see the skull has cartilage between those bones. This is cartilage. Again, it allows that baby's head to squish through a birth canal. If that was one solid bone, there'd be no squishing. It either fit or it didn't. Okay. But you can see and it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little space between all those neck vertebrae that is a little more cartilage that's going to turn to some bone. The knee and the feet are all squishy cartilage. Okay. This is why a baby can sit all squished up in a car seat, and you and I look at it and go, God, doesn't their neck hurt? No, because they don't have the muscular structure that you do when you're an adult. And so, no, it doesn't hurt. Babies are just fine squished like that. Okay. So this is where it now talks about the epiphyseal plate and the epiphyseal line. I'm going to actually scroll back to the picture of the bone as I describe this, but I want you to see where I'm getting this from. Okay. This epiphyseal line, which goes like this at the ends of the long bone, is your growth plate. And this is a picture of an adult bone where that growth plate has turned to bone. That is a sign that this patient has reached their adult height and the growth plate closed, turned to bone, like mine would be. But if we were to take an x-ray of somebody who's like 12 or 13, their growth plate is still open. They have not reached their full height yet, and that will actually be that will not be bone in that young child. So a doctor can actually take an x-ray and tell if the person has reached their full height or not. There was an episode of Grey's Anatomy where the pediatric doctor was called in to consult on a patient who had been through some serious trauma. And she walked in, didn't see the patient. She just walked into the x-rays, looked at the x-rays, looked at that epiphyseal line and said, "That's not a pediatric case." And she walked out. She goes, that's not a patient for me. That's not who I treat. And didn't have anything to do with the patient at that point. But it was all because of that epiphyseal line that you could tell that this was an adult person's x-rays versus a child. This picture here kind of demonstrates that active line, that second to last picture, and then it turns into the epiphyseal line. Notice it's labeled epiphyseal plate in that second to last picture, and that's that growth plate. The only last word I want to talk about here is the term fontanelle. Fontanelle are those soft spots in the baby's skull, where the skull has not yet joined together into a skull bone, that they're all in its separate pieces. I do want to point out before we leave this section, though, is that when we get to the skull bones, the skull has different names for the different parts, and it ties back to when the skull was into separate pieces. Even though in an adult it's all one big solid, we still call it the parietal and the occipital and the frontal because they used to be separate bones. Okay, that is the end of video number 1. So join me back to continue with video number 2, and we will continue on in this chapter.